Welcome to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. I'm Kim McCleary, President and CEO, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's program. We are starting 2022 with a terrific lineup of both in-person and live stream programming. I'll provide a brief summary of our upcoming programs at the end of the program, but many of them are already posted and available to you all for your perusal on our website. For those of you who would like to ask questions today of John Russell, there's a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions. Claire Krelitz, our communications manager and digital producer, will be managing your questions during the Q&A portion of today's program, which should start in about 20 or 25 minutes. Now on to today's program. Inside Capitol Hill, key 2022 legislative priorities with Washington expert John Russell. John Russell is a principal at Dentons Public Policy and Regulation. He will be taking a pragmatic look at the year ahead with observations on the midterms and on the future distribution of power in Washington. John, it's time to bring you on. We can't wait for this discussion. I think you're on mute, John.
I think it's only been 2 years. We should probably figure this out by now, right? Thank you, Kim, so much for having me. Good morning. Greetings from your nation's capital, where the sun may be out, but it's not working. It's cold. It's my pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit, as Kim said, of what we're looking at here in Washington. I'd like to do a little overview of what the president's first year looked like, talk about the atmospherics he's facing now. I hate to ruin the punchline, but it's getting harder. Look at what we've got from on the legislative calendar and peek into the November elections, because like it or not, we are in an election year, and that has dramatic consequences on what Washington gets done and the manner it gets it done. So if I could, I would like to show my screen. And if I've done this wrong, I would hope that someone will let me know. But I think I got it. All right. Well, let's take a quick little look into where the president has been over the last year. Comes into office. We know the time that he came into the office. January 6th, still fresh in everyone's mind. My gosh, the man was inaugurated in a Capitol building that still had broken glass on the doors, windows, and was still damaged inside. Since that point, we've seen the president get through a roughly almost $2 trillion, that's with a T, COVID response bill that covered unemployment benefits, expanded child tax credit, small business funding for local governments and states. It was a massive, massive, massive undertaking. The second thing he did after, gosh, I did the math on this one. If you go back and look at when Donald Trump declared it, former President Donald Trump declared Infrastructure Week, it was roughly 1.5 million seconds after that declaration that the Biden administration got it done. $1.2 trillion in spending. Of that, $500 billion in new programs, new authorizations. The rest of that cash, yes, that goes into existing programs the Department of Transportation had. But with this one around, you saw broadband, not only bridges and roads, but broadband. Start looking at how communities were developed and with the question of equity. I think you're going to see the administration do a lot of work around this space, but $1.2 trillion after almost 5 years, Infrastructure Week finally closes. So the president on the plus side spends almost, $3 trillion. Yes, that first tranche, that 1.9 of American Rescue and Recovery Package, that's pretty much out. The 1.2 trillion in transportation spending, infrastructure spending, that's spread out over 10 years. But you can imagine of that $500 billion in new spending, we'd expect that to hit the pavement, if you excuse the pun, a little quicker for all kinds of different reasons. Let's also take a look at just keeping the trains running on time. They had to raise the debt limit twice. You know, we forget that that was generally done without much of debate, and it's only in the last 10 years, 15 years or so that this has really become a tough vote to get done. Yes, it's a tough vote for members, but to actually get it to the floor and get it passed. So congratulations to Joe Biden. He campaigned on bringing back some normalcy and some predictability. He was able to get the debt limit moved or extended. Whether or not that's a good thing for the country, we can talk about that later. But regardless, the United States did not default. You look at the Trump era regulations that the president was able to weaken or remove. Listen, when you can't have, it's important to remember that when you're in a 50-50 Senate and what, a 5-seat majority in the House of Representatives, that's not an overwhelming mandate to get legislation done. So you've got to play on the edges and you've got to use the executive orders. The president has done that and is starting to chip away, if you will, at the Trump legacy. One thing that doesn't get a lot of mention, and I think is actually critically important, is judges. Yes, we all focus on the Supremes, but you know what? There's a lot happening on the undercard, if you will, which is critically important. Joe Biden got, I want to say 32 district judges confirmed. That far and away outpaces his predecessors. He's getting the work done. So Gratch, you got 2 slides of things are great. Look, he kicked out money, addressed COVID. We've got transportation, we've got roads, bridges, broadband, kept the government running on time, and even got some judges in. So what do we, this is a pretty good environment to operate in, right? President should be kind of coming in with a full head of steam and wind in the sails. You picked the pun, but as we know, that ain't it. The I word. Remember, it was going to be transitory. Well, it's not. You had last week Secretary Yellen say that she expected some lessening in the summer. That is certainly not transitory. And as we know, inflation has had pretty dramatic impacts on 4 presidencies. Going back to Ford, Carter, Nixon, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan all saw political hits at the ballot box in the midterm elections when dealing with inflation. Nobody wants to be an incumbent during inflationary times. It's not great sledding, and that's where we are today. You can say that's taken a little bit of wind out of the sails of the president. I think this is very important. It happens. We all know that. There is an ebb and a flow to the polls, and as we saw President Biden in his press conference last week, the first one he's had in, I think, 78 days, that went, gosh, almost 2 hours. He says he doesn't look at polls. Well, that's great. He doesn't have to, because his administration is looking at everyone all day, everyone they can get their hands on, and trying to figure out why, in fact, the president, after moving forward on COVID, getting money, getting checks in people's hands, having a dramatic success with the infrastructure package, why we're not seeing this. It's starting to settle in, and it's not looking great. And I think certainly you can say, well, it's Omicron and inflation. I think that's right, but there are other underlying threads here that I think are tripping up the president. We'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. And I think this is really one of the biggest ones. When you've got a large percentage of Americans saying that the president doesn't care about issues that I care about, that I, the voter, care about, he's missing it. It would seem at the moment that President Biden is focused on his base, and focused on his base at the peril of others. And we saw Donald Trump do something similar. We saw George Bush actually try and go the other way when he first was sworn into office. And we saw that President Obama, while he tried, certainly with the Rescue and Recovery Act that he passed, and then what became known as Obamacare, or the ACA, that those were really tacking to the left. Biden here is tacked to the left. I'd argue that he was elected because he wasn't Donald Trump, not because he had a strong legislative agenda that he was going to bring to Washington and fight to get done immediately. This was, I'm not the other guy. And do you really want the other guy? And wouldn't you like it to be a little quieter, a little toned down? Would you like not to worry about what's on my Twitter feed every day? I think that's where a lot of Americans were, certainly not the base, since he's been in power with a House and a Senate that were feeling, the Senate, of course, a late breaking majority, in the House, while tiny and really, really tiny majority. I think saw this as much more of a mandate. This is pushing what was pitched as, if you will, a moderate Joe Biden to the left, and you're seeing the numbers. It's not resulting in broad approval. So the dynamics are interesting. The president has had somewhat of a successful year. He's had some big blowups that focus much more on the inside baseball aspect of it. The fact that you're seeing breaking news about meetings that the president is having with members of the United States Senate, or if it's even breaking news that his staff is meeting with the staff of the United States Senate. You're now playing the small ball, and if you're playing small ball, you're losing. I'd argue that the president needs to be above this, to be talking in broader strokes, to not get bogged down in the deal cutting. Now, that's a little tough, because let's remember where he spent a good 30+ years. That's in the House and the Senate, and that is, that's in the Senate, and that's as a role, it grew into this role of a deal cutter. Clearly, the office of the presidency is a little different, which is funny because, of course, all 100 senators, the story goes, look at themselves in the mirror every morning, and in the background they hear "Hail to the Chief" as they comb their hair and brush their teeth. That said, it's a different gig, and the skills that the president had as a senator don't seem to be helping him now. So let's talk a little bit about what the House and Senate were going to get done before a State of the Union address, which is rather late, but not until the first week of March. I think we've all seen the voting rights issue. That was last week's fun. Anybody that was surprised by this, I'm sorry that you were, because you shouldn't have been, and you shouldn't have been surprised either that the effort to change the filibuster failed thereafter. Believe it or not, when United States senators put out a statement, go on television, say they're going to do something, more often than not, they do exactly what they say they're going to do. In this case, both Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema made it very clear that they weren't where they needed to be on redoing the filibuster, or amending the filibuster, changing the filibuster, however you want to call it, and in fact would not be able to get over that threshold to bring voting rights to the floor. Of course, the recriminations from that were fast and furious. You've seen the Arizona Democratic Party censure Senator Sinema. Somewhat stunning, but I got to tell you, do you know that 5% of the United States Senate has been censured by their own state parties? This is the time we live in and the world we live in. That said, you're starting to see a little bit of a pickup here on the edges. And on the edges of voting rights, it's the Electoral College Act of 1887. I lived in Rutherford B. Hayes's room when I went to Kenyon for 2 years, so I have a little close to this legislation. It's a bipartisan effort that's being led by Susan Collins that actually goes to and tries to neuter the ability that the president, or neuter some of the arguments that former President Donald Trump had brought up when he sought to challenge the Electoral College. It would state that, guess what, the vice president's role there is nothing more than ceremonial. I think all vice presidents in the past have certainly felt that way, Mike Pence included, but it's not written into the code. So they want to do that. Do we think that's going to catch fire and go? I think there's some issues here, and they're broader political issues. You've got a large section of the Democratic base that is disheartened, getting disengaged, and one of those incredibly important parts of the Democratic base that's not feeling the love at the moment are civil rights leaders. They are not ready or willing to give up on the Voting for the People Act, the John Lewis Act. They want to keep going. They see any changes to the Electoral College Act of 1887 as useless and fluff and not what they're going for. Those are important coalitions in the Democratic Party, and they are important voices in the Democratic Party. Will Senator Schumer be willing to chuck those aside, toss those aside, and get to something that will get 60 votes and get to the president's desk and actually address some concerns that were raised during the last electoral college count? We shall see, but that's floating out there. And what's interesting here is you're seeing some of the same United States senators on both sides of the aisle that participated in the Infrastructure and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Yes, the transportation bill. Recall that came together not with legislation that was passed by the House Democrats or not by the Senate Democratic draft. In fact, it was a bipartisan group of senators coming together and coming up with their own package. Next on the, if you will, hit parade, February 18th, the federal government will start bouncing checks and will, well, shut down. The continuing resolution expires on the 18th. We are well into, as we know, the fiscal year, and Congress has not draped itself in glory, shall we say, in the last couple of weeks of trying to get this done. There has been a growing chorus of senators and House members suggesting that Congress it's too much to bite off this year. Instead, let's just keep the levels of spending from last year, pass it all the way through, and start the process all over again. There are a couple things here that makes me think that that's not going to happen. We'll get a lot of threats about that, but that's what it is. It's a threat so that the parties that be are forced to get to the negotiation tables and get things done. The first reason why I think it's different this year is community spending projects, what we used to know as earmarks. Well, they're back. They're not huge, but they're back, and they're in both the House draft of the bill and the Senate drafts of the bills. And these are post offices, these are domestic violence clinics, these are funds for roads. It's a host of bacon that members of Congress on both sides of the aisle can bring home to their districts and talk about. So I think that when you're that vested, it's not just keeping the government open and keeping defense, or not just keeping the government open, but it's actually bringing something home to your congressional district or your state. I think you want to get something done here. It's been a long time since earmarks existed, and there's a lot of pent-up demand, as we know, for projects. And I think members are really wanting to put their stamp on this. The second thing that I think is that hurts the prospects of a full year CR is what it does to the Department of Defense. The Pentagon doesn't do CRs. As we all know, that is a massive, massive, massive operation that has massive amounts of spending and long-term projects that require budget certainty. A year-long CR doesn't do that. So you started to see the Pentagon hawks stand up and yell. They were sitting and yelling. Now they're standing up and yelling about the damage that a full fiscal year CR would do. So you've got members that are vested. They've got a little project in there, and you've got defense hawks, of which both sides of the aisle and both chambers, there are a lot, that don't want to see the Pentagon have to start reprogramming across the divisions and want to get something done. Is it going to be done by the 18th? I think that's a tougher lift. Listen, the president, as I said, is coming to speak to Congress on March, I think it's the 3rd or 1st, somewhere in there, and he's got to have something to show for it. Yes, he can talk about what they did in the Congress, in the last session of Congress, but he's got to have something new. Fiscal funding doesn't sound so sexy, but in fact, there's a lot to talk about in there. The final thing that, or one of the things that the administration and the House and Senate have wanted to get on the board and done is what's known as this U.S.-China competition package. In Congress, we're calling it the China bill. It's a series of appropriations, authorizations, and appropriations that would seek to build up and build out here in the United States our computer chip manufacturing abilities. There are some sanctions that you find in that legislation. There are some restrictions on products from products of technology that we can share with the Chinese. It's almost a laundry list, and you'd think that, well, okay, you know, we've got a common enemy here for the moment, or opponent. Maybe enemy is too strong. We'll say opponent instead, and that should be able to get both House and Senate together and get this moving. believe it or not, it's not a partisan issue on this one. It's two separate approaches. The Senate, much more lavish in spending than the House, which is a little more punitive. Speaker Pelosi last week in her press conference before heading out of town for this last week of January said that she expected the House to move a piece of legislation early in February and to join a join a House Senate conference as the Senate passed their legislation very early last year. We'll see how this one goes. Again, common opponent, we won't say enemy, common opponent, should be able to bring this together, but both sides are far apart now. Again, you start thinking about what is the president going to talk about when he gets to the podium and is no longer sitting in that great double chair in front of the flag, but is standing and singing for his supper, shall we say. All right, Build Back Better. As we know, Senator Manchin tubed this bill before Christmas. Again, not really moving off his message from where he was in the summer to through all the fall and into winter. Not too terribly big a surprise. And I think he got tremendous amount of air cover with the inflation numbers. You'll recall that was a large concern of his, one he had stated early on. So now where do they go? In the press conference the president gave last week, you heard him say he's in favor of possibly breaking up the Build Back Better bill into smaller packages. We've tried to break out here what we think has the best legs, so the best chance, medium chance, and you'll see the rest. I think it's important to know and to remember that Democrats were using budget reconciliation to get this done. That means you don't need the other side. You get 50 votes, the vice president comes in from Pennsylvania Avenue in the nice long motorcade, casts the 51st vote, and Democrats are able to send this bill on to the White House. Well, some of these things here in the best chance category certainly fit into the parameters for a Build Back Better bill. What you notice on this list is not a lot of changes on the pay force, the tax increases that people were starting to see. That, I think, sticks. The question is, how do you align where in these three columns in something that can get done and get 50 Democratic votes? Oh, by the way, you've also got to convince the House, and certainly the progressives in the House, that this is the best option for them to get something they need. They're not there yet. The distrust, distaste, you pick it, for Senator Manchin and in some respects Senator Sinema by the House progressives is more than palpable. My God, they're tweeting about it. And of course, they're also saying that they're happy to fund challengers for both those races. Quick little side, you ain't beating Joe Manchin. Let's remember, this is the guy that announced his candidacy for the United States Senate by taping a copy of then the cap and trade bill and shooting it with an AR-15. That was his first campaign commercial. Senator Sinema, a little less, shall we say, aggressive there. But you basically got about a month here where in February, where if you're going to tee something up for the president to talk about, can you move it through with Build Back Better? Can it be the appropriations package? What is actually going to get through to get to the president's desk to have them win something that the president can use to change the topic? I think it's tough, and I think it's tough because if you look at this slide here in front of you, I'd ask you to pay attention to the yellow days. Those are the days that the House and the Senate are together when they're both here in Washington, walking the marbled halls. Not a lot in February. Now we expect it to stick a little bit longer because of that 18th deadline, but that's not a lot of time. And given the fact that there isn't a lot of time, I wanted to show these other slides, other dates here on this slide. I want you to think about Congress as being a second semester senior in high school. I have a new vision into this now because my daughter is a second semester senior in high school. So trying to keep her focused is a little interesting, but it's very true. Look at these deadlines. Deadlines are the only thing that move Congress. Now they'll punch that deadline down the road a tad, but these are the inflection points at which point one could expect a little bit of movement, or at least some sort of drop dead point that the Congress is going to have to act. Again, remember, they move when they're forced to move and not before. I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2022 elections. First, let me start with generally thought that a week is a lifetime in politics, and we got a lot of weeks between now and the first week of November. But things are trending in the Republicans' perspective, in the Republicans' direction. You start with the House. You just needed 5 seats to take that. In an off year, presidents generally lose. And with that as a background, you think the House is a pretty good get. The Senate, well, candidates matter here. So I'm not quite ready to say that that's a switch. That said, you've got a lot of Democrats at the moment in safe seats that are hanging up. Folks that, and certainly we've seen this in California as both a response to redistricting, but also, let's be honest, there were some senior members of that delegation that are looking for something else to do, or maybe just tired of it all. Wanted to show the Senate here. Listen, the 4 yellow seats, that's where the game is. Those I would watch very carefully who the candidates are that get into those. And think about, can they win a statewide election? You know, I'm looking at Nevada here and thinking back to when Harry Reid had a really, really, really close race, and he was running against Sharon Engel, and she was not a good candidate. You can go back a little bit further, and though it's not on this list, think about Delaware. And anytime a Senate candidate has to start a commercial with "I am not a witch," generally not a good place to be. But Democrats are certainly going to seek to see if they can expand the playing field here, if they can move into the Missouris of the world, if there's a shot in Florida. I'm going to say this about Florida. There is no shot. Florida is Ohio, because anybody that could move out of Florida did, and they're from Ohio, and they've gone down there. That state is trending darker and darker red every day. And it's interesting, what one would have thought demographically would have meant much more of a center or maybe even a lean left. Those demographics are not showing up in the polling booth at the moment. So we talked about the House, not a far way to go, 5 seats. I wanted to show this slide here because you've already seen that they're about 5 ready to go. Look at the California seats here that are considered competitive and in the lean section on both sides. I have a hard time believing Katie Porter's in trouble, just like I have a hard time believing that Valdeo is in trouble. I think that looking at where the returns were in the recount and then trying to line those up with the new lines drawn here, I'm not sure you're going to see too much movement in California, but the game is certainly other places. You look at that toss-up D list, we've got, 8 at the moment. That's going to grow. You look at the lean R seats, it looks like Republicans are already picking up 3 seats in Arizona, New Jersey, and possibly in Texas. So I said, we're a ways out. And if you're already putting seats into the currently democratically held seats that are going to switch, and given it's an off year, things are not necessarily looking so great for House Democrats. I thought this was fun. We're all kind of geeky. I don't do baseball statistics. Instead, I do House races. If you look at these toss-ups and what happens in an off-year toss-ups, they break to the party out of power. That's not a place you want to be when you're a Democrat this time around. It certainly wasn't a place for Republicans in 18. The sentiment, the nationalization, if you will, of the campaign, it comes fast and furious. You know that Democrats are going to try and make these local elections. They want to talk about what they're doing. They don't want to talk about the president. That's hard to do, and harder and harder and harder to do as we go through the cycles. If you look back into the late Clinton years or the early Bush years, even to some respect the Obama years, which did see a dramatic switch, you're seeing an electorate that is more and more unstable. Folks are changing their mind. They're switching around. They're jumping away from either party. California, of course, the joke is you can get all the Republicans that are registered into one phone booth and have a meeting. That might be true, but certainly you're seeing a similar either move to decline to state or move to independent across the country. Well, that's what I've got. It's been a pleasure. Now I'm looking forward to the real fun and taking questions. So please, let me kick it back to you guys.
Great. Thank you so much, John. This was such a incredible overview of some of the stuff that's going on in Washington. We have a ton of questions coming in. So let's start by going back to about like censorship. So how does being censured impact congressional members? Do they face any consequences?
Absolutely none. No, well, let me be very clear. Censured by their political party in their home state, which is what, so Arizona Democratic Party censured Senator Kristen Sinema, it don't matter. Now in the House, that is also a form of punishment. And here again, what does anybody get removed from a committee after they're censured? Not necessarily. Are they removed from Congress when they're censured? Not necessarily. In some cases, do they have a badge of honor with their base because they're being unfairly targeted by, you pick whoever the enemy is? Yeah. So again, it's more of a frustration valve outlet than it is actual recriminations.
And so then this next person asks, why hasn't Joe Manchin been censured by his state party?
Because it's West Virginia. West Virginia Democrat is not a Los Angeles Democrat. It's not even an Illinois Democrat. And one can make an argument, it's probably not a Pennsylvania Democrat either. Recall, Joe Manchin was the governor and a very popular governor. Joe Manchin gets reelected with upwards of 70% of the vote. There aren't a lot of Democrats in West Virginia, or there may be, but they sure as heck turned out for former President Trump. I think that again, the censure stuff, it's a frustration valve. It doesn't have any meaning. And I'd argue that West Virginians at the moment aren't mad at Joe Manchin.
Interesting stuff. So from your work at Dentons, what is the benefit of trying to appeal to the center right for Democrats? Do you think that they will get enough support trying to appeal to this group? And what issues could the left find with the more center right potential Democrats?
So I'm a big believer in its addition, not subtraction. And to get legislation that actually won't face dramatic challenges the second you're out of power. Think about the ACA and how many times we were repealing and replacing and it was going to the courts and all the rest. Now you're seeing the same thing with mandates. When one party acts unilaterally, the other party is left out. And when they're left out on the sidelines, they just throw stones. And that is that's why I argue that for both sides, it's important to get that center right or center left. Where can you go? I'd argue the technology space at the moment has the most. You're not going to do it on immigration. You're not going to do it. You could do it a little bit on spending. You might be able to do it on the child tax credit. But the concerns surrounding technology, certainly social media, privacy, those are bipartisan concerns. And it's interesting. You'd expect a lot of Californians to be real fired up just looking at the politics of it. And then you realize, oh, wait, where do they do all that work? And you're like, oh, sure. So that's why Speaker Pelosi is kind of quiet on this. And that's why Zoe Lofgren, rather important member of the House Judiciary Committee, seems not to have much of a problem here. I think that there's some movement there. I think that also you certainly saw it with the response to China on the Uyghurs. That sometimes you can, in fact, find that bipartisan balance on issues surrounding human rights. Where are you not going to find bipartisan agreement? Anything to do with voting rights that's not fixing the electoral college. You're not going to, for a Republican, you're not going to get away with federalizing state elections. It's almost verboten. You're not touching it. But again, when things get smaller, when packages get smaller, you're able to really focus those energies and efforts. And I go back to how many votes did we get on the CARES Act the first time around? How many votes did we get back? People forget about this, but the first 8 billion, I think, that went out real quick with a half a day of debate. generally around crisis, there seems to be, you can find some help. It's tough being a moderate Republican in the House of Representatives these days. You've certainly seen what happens to those that stand up and express their displeasure with the former president. But that said, I think you can move the ball here on some technology issues, certainly approaches and government funding.
Thank you. And on this topic, who do you think the Biden administration is catering more to, the center of the party or the left of the party? And then sort of a follow-up question to that, does the Biden administration's catering differ in their rhetoric versus their policy, or do you see those as being aligned?
Joe Biden was elected because, as we talked about, he wasn't the other guy, right? And he was going to bring some bipartisanship back to Congress. If you recall, that was the talk, that he was going to lower the rhetoric and get both sides working. When he came out and did the COVID relief bill, the American Rescue and Recovery Package, as a Democratic-only bill, he lost a lot of credibility there. And I think that's a concern. And well, it set a bad, I don't want to call it a precedent, but it left a bad taste in I think Republicans' mouths, because they were ready to not jump all the way in, but a little bit. And they were left on the sidelines. And I'm sorry, Claire, what was the second part of that question?
Do you think that the administration's rhetoric and policy align?
Yeah, so Joe Biden is supposed to be a moderate guy, ends up, first thing he does is it's a Democratic only, and we are talking about long-held Democratic priorities that are expensive, that are broad and long-reaching, that would in fact say although you look at the numbers, Americans seem to be somewhat okay with it until you hit what it's going to cost. But he seems to be governing like he's got a 58-seat majority and he only has to pick up 2 Republicans in the Senate. The governing style and the issues that were chosen they're not easy lifts in such a divided town. 50-50 United States Senate's a big deal. You're not going to get a lot done there. There is not there's not a mandate. 5 seats in the House of Representatives, my God, that means 5 members get up grumpy one day, and out of 435, trust me, more than half get up grumpy every day, and you're in trouble. So I think that the rhetoric that the administration is using is in fact echoed with their behind-the-scenes conversations and their outreach to the United States senators. I would argue, I mean, shoot, you saw it in the press conference. Joe Biden admitted that he hasn't talked to Mitt Romney in a long time. Well, again, sure, Utah senator, you'd think he'd be very far to the right. In fact, there are things that Mitt Romney wants to get done that they can, in fact, find agreement on. You got to be doing that. And for someone like President Biden, you'd think that he would get that joke. He's been in the vice president's office for 8 years, in the United States Senate for 30 years. Now he's got the White House movie theater. Time to start inviting those senators and their wives over for dinner and watch a movie. And you know what? You can wear a mask and spread out. But that type of touch matters.
This next person asked, why isn't Medicaid expansion more popular?
Cost, first associated with it. The blood oath that many red states took, that the ACA, for whatever reason, is bad. And the let's not forget, I can't forget, and let me share this image with you. During the very early years of very early Tea Party movement, there was a very large protest out in front of the United States Capitol building. There was a very large sign there by one of the Tea Party movement members, and this was during the Obamacare debate, that said, "Get government out of my Medicare." Wait, what? Okay. Well, you've got to see, governors, even to their own detriment, are churning away dollars. Certainly not in California. And having the pleasure of working for LA Care, which I like to say is the nation's largest public plan, and has been able to really benefit from the ACA. When I say really benefit, I mean really expand coverage, really get to those that are most needing of help. It's a safety net, for God's sakes. And they've been able to, because of the ACA and some clever and creative thinking, really expand the offerings that they're giving, from housing to education to helping doctors with the tuition payments. You'd think that free money from manna from heaven, shall we say, from Washington, D.C. would be something that governors would be interested in, and to their own detriment, I'd argue, they're not.
Well, I kind of have a follow-up question about this, which is, from what it seems, the state of healthcare in the U.S. seems to be very unfavorable with high drug prices, big pharma, just the lack of easy care. And so it seems like an issue that could be bipartisan, but as you've talked about, it very much isn't. So is there any way that we could depolarize the issue of healthcare to actually improve it, or is that just beyond possibility at this point with how polarized the issue is?
It'd be nice, but unfortunately, no, there are two different views, right? The first view is, and this is oversimplification, but you have to start with the oversimplified before we really dig down into it. One says, hey, let's have government can make decisions, and the bigger the government is, the more healthcare, and nobody should be able to pay for it, and citizens shouldn't have to pay for it, and it's Medicare for all. Go. The other side said, well, hold on. We're all for making some changes in the market, but it should be market driven, and Americans should know what things cost, and with a little bit of transparency, maybe that helps drive prices down. And oh, by the way, anytime you get government involved as a buyer, prices generally don't go down, as we've seen. So you start with these two kind of competing camps. John Boehner said that it was going to take a crisis to bring Americans together again, and we are in a crisis, yet we seem to be more divided than ever, and it's a crisis about health, and it's certainly the impacts to our healthcare providers and industry are dramatic. I do a little work for an association of international nurses. We are the folks that recruit, train, and bring into the United States foreigners to work at the bedside. As you can well imagine, given the current situation of staffing in the United States, we have more orders than we've ever had in our history, and we've got a real problem trying to get the appropriate amount of exit interviews at embassies. This is an issue that should garner bipartisan support, and it does. However, not enough of it at the moment to really get something moving. I think that Americans have to. It's interesting. Republicans took control during the Obama years based on the ACA. It's now one of the most popular programs in existence. You roll the clock back a little bit further, and it was the prescription drug bill, which only 3 Democrats voted for in the House of Representatives. That's the most popular program, government program in the healthcare space. I'm not willing to toss pharma over the side yet. I'm a big believer that science and innovation matters, and we are the leaders in the world on that. And that stuff costs money. Now, should there be a little bit more transparency so we don't have the pharma bros of the world profiting off the backs of patients in need? Absolutely. I do believe, I'm one of those guys that believes sunlight and transparency leads to change. I think, though, that if you're looking for government to be able to negotiate drug prices in Medicare, which would be, I would think, a significant thing, we're not there yet. We will probably get there within 4 years. I'd argue that pharma thinks that already and is making that preparation. They're trying as best they can, which is why they were the largest employer of folks like me last cycle to try and stop the negotiating, trying to stop legislation that would have allowed the government to negotiate for drug prices. It's a tough one. You've got both camps on very different sides. The path forward would be on small things, vision, hearing, those types of expansions. But I don't believe you're going to get a Republican Party and a Democratic Party to throw away the principles that they have really entrenched and find some middle ground here in the short term.
Thank you. So moving out a little bit from just domestic politics, this next person asks, what's your first impression of the political impact of an invasion of Ukraine?
You had Afghanistan and the pullout there. which was really, and if you look at the numbers, about a week before was the high water mark for the president, and it's been downhill since then. We thought, or it was certainly couched, that Joe Biden would be harder on Putin than the past president was. And seemingly the past president didn't get, nobody invaded when he was around. I think the political implications are tough, and they're tough to read because, let's be honest, only a sliver of Americans, voting Americans, really care that much until Americans' troops' boots are on the soil. Now, we will be sending aircraft, we're sending sea power into the region, but until you've got the visions of American troops unloading a Chinook and hitting the dirt in Ukraine, I don't think a lot of people are going to pay much attention. It will certainly be not a great headline. It will add to those that are already have questions about the president. I think these will just reinforce those questions. But from no one's going to win or lose a race in Congress based on what Putin does in Ukraine.
With how nationalized politics are becoming, just the intense appeal and draw that our domestic politics takes, do you think that Americans are losing interest or caring about international affairs and international policy like this?
I think Americans are losing interest writ large. I mean, you look at the polling numbers, you look at the Nielsen ratings for cable news, and they've fallen off the table. I think we're all tired of this for a lot of different reasons. But I think we look to Washington and say, we just want results, whatever those may be. And some of us don't want results. Other of us want dramatic results. But I think there's a disengagement here. Internationally speaking, we've never been good at that. We really haven't. I mean, you could let's try now. Hey, go, here's a blank map. Put your finger in Iraq, put your finger on Afghanistan, and for giggles, point to Haiti. And we know how those things are going to churn out. Seemingly, we pay a lot of attention when we've been hit, struck, threatened. We don't pay a lot of attention when it's somebody else. I mean, my gosh, it's a slaughter right now in Yemen. Not a lot of people are, okay. You had a rather insensitive comment made by a certain NBA owner that nobody cares about the Uyghurs. Well, we talk a little bit about it, but we're not doing very much. Yes, Congress did pass, the president signed. Ooh, that's bad, but Americans don't understand that Uyghur starts with a U.
Yeah, and just a small plug to our organization, we do try to address some of these issues by putting on programming that raises global literacy, but that obviously is a huge problem and always has been for those of us in the United States. So moving on.
I almost believe, if you remember, and this is far too much, but you know what? We should issue, if we're going to send everybody a mask, which we're doing, we should send everybody the shower curtain that's got the map of the world on it. So that just in the morning when you're showering, you can actually look at it. All right, let's figure out what's in Africa. Let's figure out what's in Europe. And I'm only half joking. I tell you, we had one of those in my home, and it saved me on a world geography exam that I hadn't really studied for and forgot that I had, but was able to pull back the images of the shower curtain. So I'm sorry, little aside.
No, yes, I love it. So moving on a little bit to 2024. One person asked, DeSantis or Trump? Who's your money on?
I got a bet. I put DeSantis over Trump, but I'd also watch Pompeo. And before I did any of that, I'd look at Nikki Haley and Christine Noem, South Carolina and South Dakota governors, respectively. And of course, Haley was the UN ambassador. Certainly, Donald Trump still has tremendous sway over the Republican Party at the moment. As we've seen in the last week or so, the legal problems get worse, aren't going away anytime soon. You've got the Senate Minority Leader Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in open warfare with the former Republican president. I think that I think that you're going to see a tremendous Trump tail in House races and candidates in the House. I think you're going to see a Trump. There will be Trump candidates in the United States Senate races, and the question will be is, are you going to get a more Chamber of Commerce, if you will, Republican, and can they get through at the moment? But to answer that question, DeSantis, I think, has a little bit more runway at the moment than the president, and but I'd say there are a few others out there that are worthy of watching.
And then the flip side to that question, do you think that Biden will run again in 2024? And if not, what is your prediction for other Democratic candidates, Harris, Buttigieg, others?
Well, okay, so yes, he runs again, barring, unless he strokes out, that guy's going to be on the ballot. And I think you don't, oh, that was fun for 4, I'm done. No, you run, you win, and then you resign. And so you ensure that you still have your folks where you want them. The vice president's had a hard year, and she has not done much to, though her presence on the ticket was historic, her presence in the position is historic. She hasn't done a lot to assuage concerns that have been dogging her most of her career. It's a tough YouTube search right now if you do the vice president and interviews, because of course, those that seek to malign her have a lot, unfortunately, of content to use. That said, I think this is a lot of, it's also the same stuff of, oh, Joe Biden's going to, fire his chief of staff. The hell he is? No, Joe Biden and Ron Klain are like this. They share a brain. They've known each other. They trust each other. Klain got him elected, and it ain't happening. So a lot of this kind of staring at the, oh gosh, Joe Biden's not going to run. Who's it going to be? Barring health concerns, he runs. If it's not, certainly it's the vice president, Ms. Harris. I'm not putting, Buttigieg has a huge job here in the next month or so, in the next couple of months. He needs to put some points up on the board. He needs to be seen as throwing it in a tad. Congratulations on his twins, but the story shouldn't be his paternity leave, and that's what it is at the moment. He's got to actually throw some, put some stakes in the ground and show that his leadership as the Department of Transportation head matters. But I think you're watching a lot of people really keep their powder dry while the chattering classes have this discussion about what happens when. It's going to be Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is going to be his vice president, and they'll go and they'll have the full support of the Democratic Party. You're not going to see a challenge from the Bernie wing, if you will, or I should say this, a meaningful challenge. So that's where I'm buying. That's where I'm putting it there. Joe Biden's back on the ballot. Kamala Harris is his vice president, and Buttigieg by that point probably does maybe another 2 years, and then goes and writes a book, another book.
Thank you. So this person says crypto is crashing this week. Can you talk a little bit about how Washington insiders like yourself view crypto? Is there any key legislation in the pipeline that deals with cryptocurrency?
Crypto is crashing. Guys like me watch it, want to go down lower so we can get in because we missed it the first time. There's being a little facetious about that. Listen, last week you saw Treasury come out with their long-awaited kind of survey report on crypto and, of course, the digital dollar. Strong point in that was, the United States, the supremacy of the United States dollar is challenged if we don't have a digital dollar. That seemed to be the kicker in that report, but what was underlining that was, oh, and we're not going to do anything, excuse me, it wasn't Treasury, it was the Fed, and we're not going to do anything without the White House and Congress weighing in here. So you've had the House and the Senate have had several hearings on cryptocurrency this year alone. You've got the White House, which will put out a executive order here, we expect the next week or so, where the president's going to direct his agencies to study the issue and report back. Is it a 90-day? Is it 180-day? Probably be 180-day, but we're not quite sure about that. Congress and the White House and Congress and the administration writ large are in data gathering mode. I think it's tough to get big legislation, and this would be big legislation through in a election year, but I would imagine that more and more and more talk around the issue of crypto, around instituting a digital dollar will continue. And certainly it is a space that education is needed on. Members of Congress, while we've got a few evangelists for crypto, generally aren't quite sure what this is and quite sure how it helps their constituents. That's the argument that's got to be made for those looking to carve out their little place here in the crypto space. Certainly, guys like me don't think it's going away. Certainly, guys like me are trying to line up a crypto client or two to get involved in the debate, to start to taking those clients up to Capitol Hill and positioning them as thought leaders and as folks that understand the process, or understand exactly what's going on and understand the benefits of crypto technology. But if someone could explain an NFT to me, I'd be really happy, because I'm trying to get my kids just to make me one, and they haven't yet.
I have a friend who's a graphic designer, and I keep telling her that she should start trying to cash in on that.
Absolutely.
I too don't understand it, but maybe TikTok can help us all out.
Gary V. Woohoo!
Yeah. So this will be the final question from the audience. So this person asked, with inflation and everything else going on, are you concerned that we're headed towards a major recession, or do you think things will normalize soon?
You've had the Secretary of Treasury saying that inflation is going to be with us and not relax until midsummer. The stock market's down, what was it? Last time I checked, 700 points this morning. Just about time daughter's going to college. Great. But I want to be very clear. I'm not an economist. I went to Kenyon College, so I had to take Econ 101 and 102, and I did. I don't know how you can pump in as much money into the economy as we have and not have this inflation aspect of it. I think that unfortunately the Fed dropped the ball here. Remember, that's their job, and they missed it. You have a troubling employment picture ahead. But here's what's good. We've got technology today that, if used and deployed correctly, will generally prevent you from dying from a vicious virus. Until that virus is in fact endemic as opposed to pandemic, there is great threat to, I think, the economy. We've got those tools though, which is why I think that a long-term recession, that's hard to say. Remember, we already bounced once, and that was April, May, June-ish, right, of 2000, and then we've been back up. I think the stock market, of course, has been on fire because it's cheap, easy money, and that's going to be reeled back in. The Fed's going to make some tough choices here over the next couple of months. Is it Volcker tough? Test your knowledge there, but possibly I think they're going to try and do it a little lighter. But I do think that should we not be able to get our hands around COVID, and should we keep going through these every 3 or 4 months, new variants, and oh my God, let's shut everything down until we know about it, that's of great concern. And if I could I make one little point here? I'm joined today by my mother, who is somewhere in the sitting on the other screen. She took me to a town hall meeting when I was a sophomore in high school. I was lucky enough to grow up in Los Angeles, and I made a terrible decision so many years ago and moved to DC, which was supposed to be 2 years, and now it's like 20 plus. Yikes. So when I told Mom that I was able to do this and invited to do this, it was really special to me. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. Mom, I hope I did you proud. I'm trying. And your grandkids are fine, and Bergen got into Boulder last night, so we'll talk about what all that means later. Thank you for having me. One little quick plug. I do put out a weekly-ish little newsletter. It's called Washington on One Page. If you're interested in tracking what's going on in DC from the lobbyist perspective, send a note to Washington on One Page at gmail.com, and I'd be happy to add you to the list.
Thank you, John. We have that information about your newsletter in the chat if anybody's interested. Hello to your mom. I think you did make her very proud. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all these insights. I'm going to ask Kim to come back and close out the session.
Claire, thank you so much. That was a terrific job moderating and doing the Q&A together. John, thank you so much for joining us. That was so informative, and we hope to have you back soon. To our viewers, we have some terrific upcoming programs. This week, we have a special screening for our members, Drive My Car, Japan's selection for the best international feature film. We also have on Friday a partnered program with the American Council on Germany with German politician Sigmar Gabriel and Ambassador John Emerson, who you've all enjoyed many times on our live streams. We have yet another member-only screening, a hero Iran selection for best international film. On the 31st, we have Martin Indek, former ambassador of Israel, who will be speaking on the art of Middle East diplomacy. And of course, February 1st, politics in the time of coronavirus with Dan Schnur, 5 p.m. on Tuesday. Please check out our website. We will be posting more programs, both live stream and in person every day. Take care, stay safe, and we hope to see you Friday. Take care.